Every one of us, at some point in our lives, we've done something silly. Some of us many times. Even the great Solomon, who was reputed to be the wisest man in his own days, did a couple of silly stuffs. And there's a reason for that. Sometimes it's just lack of information. Maybe if we had more information about that thing that we were making a decision on, we would have gone a different direction. So it's always good to exercise patience and to avoid knee-jerk reactions in many issues of life. But besides lack of information, there are many other reasons why we do silly stuffs, one of which is lack of sleep. So today we want to talk about sleep and how it influences and affects our spirituality. We begin by reading from the book of Psalms, in particular Psalms 127, the first two verses. It says, "Unless the Lord builds the house, the builders labor in vain. Unless the Lord watches over the city, the guards stand watch in vain. In vain you rise early and stay up late, toiling for food to eat, for he grants sleep to those he loves." God grants sleep to his beloved, meaning sleep is a blessing from God. But how is that so? We'll get deeper into it. When it comes to spirituality and worship, we all know that our hearts and our minds play key roles in that whole experience and activity and engagement. So I want us to talk about our minds, or to use a different word, our rationality. When it comes to spirituality and worship, we know that our hearts and our heads play key roles in that whole experience, activity, and engagement. And I want us to talk about our heads or our minds or our rationality a little bit more. It's often easy to assume that our rationality exists in a vacuum. How do I mean? When we're wrestling with issues, many of us often think that our thinking about that issue is not being interrupted or influenced by other things. We think we are being as objective as we can, as is possible, but often case it isn't. Our rationality, our thinking is often influenced by emotions and feelings that are just sitting there in the background. And because they are in the background, we take them for granted and we don't realize how much they influence our thinking. But it's not just emotions and feelings. Our rationality is also influenced by interests, desires, motivations that are also there in the background and we don't realize they are affecting us. Hence, it is important that we take note of these background factors a little bit more. But most times they will just remain background. Not every one of us actually get the luxury or even the opportunity to stand back and assess our assumptions and our motivations. What else do we do in that case then? What we can actually do is endeavor to put our minds and our bodies in good state. Let's consider a biblical example to make this point even clearer. David. We all remember that story of David when the prophet Nathan came to him and let him know that somebody had done something evil in the kingdom. The story of that rich man who ignored his large flocks of herds and decided to take the only sheep that poor man had to entertain his visitor. And when David heard that story, we all know his wrath and judgment. That man deserves the most harsh punishment that anyone should ever get. But immediately Nathan said to David, "You are the one I'm talking about." David's demeanor changed entirely. What am I calling attention to? Again, it's the background factors that are there influencing our rationality, but which we take for granted and we don't acknowledge are affecting us. But like I said, it's not every time, just like we see in this story of David, that we actually get to stand back and assess our background influences. If not for the prophet Nathan, David would probably have thought this could never be me and stood with that judgment. But maybe we need to consider another story to help us with what I said we need to do to keep our minds and bodies in the right state so that we can be in a better place to make better decisions. And it's the story of David's immediate predecessor, Saul. We all know that story as well. At some point, after Saul realized that God had rejected him as king of Israel, he became a little bit irrational. And here's where I want to call attention to. Oftentimes when that demonic spirit comes upon him and he begins to act irrationally and do stupid and crazy things, often what brings him back to calmness and rationality is good music, which interestingly, was played by David himself. And what am I calling attention to? Putting him back in a state of mind was the key thing. It might have been done by good music played on David's part, but the point was putting him back in the right state of mind, calming him down so that his thinking, his judgment could be as good as is possible. And that's what we often need to do for ourselves, because energy is everything. And we know that we need sleep to actually recharge, to renew our energy. When you go for too long without adequate sleep, you lose your energy and you easily become irrational. And your irrationality might actually affect your spirituality. You might get angry at the wrong person and maybe even get angry at God for no apparent reason, just because you haven't had enough sleep. So it's important that you give yourself enough sleep. It is important that we give ourselves enough sleep, because sleep helps us to recharge. It helps to renew our energy. And as I said earlier, energy is everything. Energy is everything. I want you to take that to my heart. And since that's the point, energy is everything and sleep helps us to regain our energy, maybe there are some other things we should also take note of that helps us to build and renew our energy. Number one, eating appropriately. We know that when you're starving, you're not really yourself. We know that when we starve, we're not really ourselves. We can get a little bit irrational when we are starving, not just hungry. And the flip is also true. When you are overfull, when we overeat, we're also not ourselves. We do irrational stuff. Hence why the Bible seriously condemns drunkenness, because drink, and strong drink, as the Bible puts it, takes us out of ourselves. We become something else other than ourselves. So eating right, eating at the proper time and eating right is key to renewing our energy or maintaining our energy. And that affects what we do when we are fasting. In the case of those who want to go on extended fast, it is important that you take water. It is important that you take water. I know it has been taught a lot to go on really extended fast, sometimes without water. I do not encourage that. Once you're getting to your third day of extended fasting, I will encourage taking water. But much more importantly, beyond eating right and taking water when you are going on extended fasting, community. Community. What do I mean? We see in that story of both David, in those stories of David and Saul, that David needed the prophet Nathan to point out to him what he wasn't seeing, what he had missed. He needed somebody else, community. Likewise, Saul needed somebody else to play music to bring him back to his right mind. Also, community. Every one of us, we need community, because this is one thing I've learned. Knowing is a whole communal activity. It's not an individual activity. You and I, we can only get our own perspective. My perspective, your perspective. But when we come together, we can get much more rounded perspective, and we know better when we get other perspectives beside ours. That is why I said it that way. Knowing is a whole communal activity, not just an individual activity. And when we are in danger of allowing our senses and those background feelings and emotions and interests and desires and motivations, when we are in danger of those things clouding our judgment and having us misunderstand the situation, community can give necessary pushback to those interests and those motivations and those feelings. So community is important as well. And so community is also important in worship. But so we do not lose the original point of this video. Energy is everything, and sleep helps us to renew our energy. So get enough sleep, because your spirit needs it.